I have Donald Trump's attorney with the New York hush money trial here to help me go through some of the biggest stories regarding the Supreme Court, Trump's sentencing being delayed, and other questions. Will Scharf, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, it's really great to be back with you. I had a lot of fun chatting with you last time.
Yes. So help me understand this. In the last few days, Judge Juan on the New York case against Trump called for his sentencing to be delayed from January 11th until mid to late September. How did this change come about? Is this good or bad in your eyes? How does this help you? Help my audience understand this situation.
Sure. So, I mean, first, we won a massive victory at the U.S. Supreme Court last Monday. At oral argument, Justice Gorsuch called our presidential immunity case one for the ages. And he's absolutely right. This is a huge opinion, obviously hugely beneficial for President Trump, but also just a really important vindication of our constitutional system, of the separation of powers, of the office of the presidency. What's happened since then, because that opinion was so decisive and because of how broad it is, it's coming into play in a number of President Trump's other cases. So that appeal arose out of the D.C. federal prosecution into President Trump, but we're now seeing that have a real impact into the Florida federal prosecution into President Trump. That's the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And then, as has been reported in the news, in the New York so-called hush money trial as well, brought by the New York DA's office. Basically, the Supreme Court opinion says that where you have evidence of immune acts, if the president commits an official act for which he's entitled to presidential immunity, those acts cannot be used as evidence even in a prosecution over a president's private conduct. So in that New York case, President Trump was being prosecuted for his private conduct, not for his official acts as president. But some of the evidence introduced really did relate to his official conduct in office, official White House communications, meetings at the White House, that sort of thing. So none of that evidence should have been allowed in at trial. We actually moved to exclude it before trial and lost that motion. Now we have moved that court, the New York court, Judge Merchan, again, to basically to stay sentencing until we figure out the ramifications of this presidential immunity opinion on his case. We believe that it should be declared a mistrial at the very least. And it's really important to note, Judge Merchan didn't just stay sentencing. He pushed the sentencing date off by over 2 months. He also asked for further briefing and motions on this presidential immunity issue. And in his order, he even says that he is staying sentencing to a particular date in September if it is needed at all. Judge Merchan is essentially acknowledging that the issues that we've raised because of the presidential immunity opinion are so serious that it might kick this whole case out, that it might result in a mistrial, in which case there would be no sentencing. That's a huge development. It's obviously very important for President Trump. The folks on the left keep calling him a convicted felon. Until the day of sentencing, that's just not true. And now it appears that sentencing may not happen at all.
Yeah. I always got the feeling that part of this was to get some kind of title like that, where they could brandish his image, his reputation. Oh, he's a felon. I'm the only one that's not a felon standing on this debate stage, right? And to be able to weaponize that titling against him. But as you say, until he's sentenced, it's actually improper to say that because the court case isn't finalized. Is that correct?
That's correct. Until final judgment is entered at the time of sentencing, President Trump is not a convicted felon. I said at the outset of this in a number of news appearances, the only realistic outcome of this New York case was a talking point for the Biden campaign. And that's what we've seen play out. And frankly, in their haste to get that talking point, in their haste to be able to say that President Trump had been convicted of these essentially meaningless felonies, they ran roughshod over criminal procedure, over the rules of evidence, over President Trump's constitutional rights. And as a result of that, they've opened this vulnerability in their case. And thanks to the Supreme Court's decisive action on our presidential immunity appeal, we're going to have a lot more work to do in the coming weeks. But we feel really good about our chances, even in New York, that President Trump is not going to have any real problems arising out of that case, despite the jury verdict.
Okay. Now, in addition to being part of Trump's defense team in New York, you've also been directly working with the Supreme Court in defense of these rulings, right?
Yeah, so I work on President Trump's appellate team. We handle appellate issues as they arise. So we've been working in close coordination with all of the different teams and then handling the appeals ourselves. So I was at the U.S. Supreme Court for the argument on presidential immunity. I was sort of in the number 2 seat while my colleague John Sauer argued that case. I've been on the briefs, and then where necessary, we've been supporting the trial teams, like the lawyers who tried the case in New York with issues and motions and pleadings as they arise.
Okay. Were you shocked like I was to have, I believe it was Justice Sotomayor, use an example of Trump calling on SEAL Team 6 to essentially like take out Biden? I thought it was so inappropriate to have that in her dissent. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
So instead of focusing on the law, the left is focusing on politics. They want to put these incendiary comments, these more left-wing judges and justices, they want to put these sort of incendiary comments on the record because they know the political ramifications of that and they know how the press will treat it. Now, we've had a republic. The American Republic has lasted a very long time, and we've obviously never seen a president do things like what they're saying. For very good reason. We have powerful structural checks in our constitutional system of government to prevent a president or really any office holder from going rogue and doing these sort of dastardly evil things. But never in American history before have we seen a post hoc prosecution of a former president. Of all the structural checks that have safeguarded our republic, that's never been one that's been a feature of our system until President Trump came along and the left decided to unfurl this massive campaign of lawfare to handicap him as he started running for president again. So the left is totally tied up in these absurd hypotheticals about military coups and assassinations. That's not what any of these cases are about. What these cases are about, it's the office of the presidency. Is can the courts, after the fact, get in and decide whether they like or don't like what a president did and potentially throw him in prison because they don't like the decisions that he made. As President Trump has said repeatedly, if a president didn't have immunity from prosecution or from civil liability for his official acts in office, it would be impossible to be president. From day one in office, his political rivals would be threatening him with prosecution for every controversial decision that he makes. You know, our founders talked a lot about the need. Alexander Hamilton called it energy in the executive. The idea that you needed an executive, a president who was able to make the tough decisions and take decisive action where needed. A system like what the left wanted here with post hoc prosecution, criminal liability for official acts in office, that's calculated to handicap the office of the presidency. And I think all Americans would hopefully be able to agree that we do need a president able to take the sorts of decisive action that presidents are regularly called on to take. And that's why this opinion, this presidential immunity opinion, to me is so important. It goes well beyond President Trump, and it's really more about protecting the very careful separation of powers, the balancing of all of these different offices and all of these different parts of our government against each other that our founders so brilliantly set up in the Constitution.
Yeah. Do you think, barring this new immunity ruling from the Supreme Court, do you believe that Judge Juan Merchan wants to jail Donald Trump, or at least home arrest or something? Or is he able to remain calculated in this, what is really a first-time misdemeanor that's been reclassified in order to get Trump? What did your gut tell you as far as what they might actually do with the sentencing?
So without getting too deep into litigation strategy, our plan from the start is that any sentence imposed would be rapidly and aggressively appealed. And typically in a case like this, any sentence, whether it's imprisonment or home confinement or even probation, would be stayed where we have as strong appellate issues as we have here. So I've said previously, I don't think President Trump will end up being subjected to any sentence whatsoever in that New York case, because I think we have ample grounds to appeal and we will get that verdict overturned. They ran roughshod over core notions of due process, the requirements of jury unanimity, which are core to our constitutional system. I mean, there are just so many clear constitutional errors in that case, to say nothing of just crazy evidentiary decisions and numerous trial decisions that we would be able to challenge on appeal. I believe that any normal appellate court, any normal trial judge for that matter, would stay the imposition of any sentence while we appeal those issues. That's what I expect in New York. Judge Merchan obviously has discretion to impose a sentence. Under standard New York sentencing protocols, President Trump would get probation at worst. But even if he were to go higher than that, I think any sentence would be stayed pending appeal. And we would have the opportunity in the appellate courts, potentially all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, to challenge the very serious errors that were made during that case's proceeding. I'll say this, and this sounds a little bit triumphalist, but we've now been to the U.S. Supreme Court 3 times in the last year. We've won all 3 of those cases. We're happy to keep going back up to them if we have to. But I would hope that at some point the left would just realize that this campaign of lawfare and election interference is failing, and that they would get back to contesting the election the way that Americans have been contesting elections since the dawn of the Republic, which is at the ballot box instead of in these insane legal proceedings.
Yeah. Another ruling came out of the Supreme Court, and I don't pretend to be a lawyer, but basically it was like, in order to criminally convict somebody, there has to be a unanimous, I guess, result. And so now then they start comparing the Trump outcome with the hush money trial, where they're saying that the judge gave these very vague instructions, like 50 pages worth, didn't hand over the instructions. So now they had to like memorize or commit to memory all of the rules. And then they were basically given like a checkbox saying, you know, just check whichever ones you think are correct. And as long as you check something, we'll sentence him and give him that label as a felon. Help me understand that whole situation.
Yeah, so jury unanimity is a core constitutional right. That's the idea that if you're in front of a jury of 12 people, you can't be convicted criminally if 8 of them agree, but 4 of them disagree. And even more than that, the jury needs to be unanimous in terms of what they think you did wrong. They can't just all agree that you did something wrong. They all have to agree that you did a specific thing wrong. And unless you can cross that bar, a defendant in this country cannot be criminally convicted. That is black letter constitutional law, incontrovertible. What Judge Merchan did in this New York case is he said that you can agree that there was business records fraud. You can agree that it was intended to interfere with the election, but you can disagree with the way that it would have interfered in that election and the way that it was all covered up. So there were essentially 3 different bases on which the jury could find that this business records fraud constituted a felony under New York law. The predicate offenses were tax fraud, violation of another New York business records law, or potentially a violation of federal elections law. And then to sort of add insult to injury, Judge Merchan didn't include what's called a special verdict form, a form where the jury would indicate which of those predicate offenses they thought were violated. So we don't even know if the jury was unanimous or not. I mean, that's just a core problem with the way that that case was decided. We think the case law is very much on our side. The Supreme Court of the United States, as well as New York appellate courts, have consistently upheld this idea that the jury needs to be unanimous. And again, I think in their haste to get Trump here, these folks on the other side bent a lot of rules, and I think that'll come back to haunt them in the end. But we got a lot of great opinions out of the Supreme Court this cycle. The Fisher case, which was a case arising out of one of the January 6th cases, is another huge one where the Supreme Court smacked down the Biden Department of Justice and said that the way that they were charging these nonviolent protesters on January 6th with this sort of trumped up felony offense, obstructing a government proceeding, it just wasn't borne out by the statute, that the statute couldn't be used in the way that the Biden Department of Justice was using it. So really up and down the line, what we've seen here from the U.S. Supreme Court is a reassertion of normalcy, that they want normal procedures, normal law to be followed, even in these politically controversial cases. And to me, that's just a breath of fresh air. What the Biden folks have tried to do repeatedly is bend the law, stretch the law to try to punish their political opponents. I think that's wrong. I think that's deeply violative of core American principles. And I think, fortunately, the Supreme Court sees these efforts for what they are. And that's why we're seeing things like the presidential immunity opinion, the Fisher case, a lot of their other opinions in recent months as well.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is, over on Twitter, I see the left like losing their mind. Oh, the conservative judges, they keep ruling in favor of Trump, right? But they're literally saying, give us clarification specific to Trump. And then when they give it, they're mad and say, oh, this is all about Trump and protecting Trump, as if he's having like red phone in the Batcave phone calls with, the Supreme Court in order to say, get on my side or else, it's like they're literally asking for clarification of the law specific to Trump, but then they lose their minds.
Yeah, the left loves playing the referee. President Trump has likened it to Bobby Knight, the basketball coach, who'd be sort of up in the face and shouting and screaming at referees all game in the hope of getting better calls. That's what the left has been doing with the court. These unprecedented attacks on Justice Thomas and Justice Alito over absolute garbage. It's all intended to try to shape the court and push the court against making the sorts of opinions that they have to issue if they're going to uphold the law and the Constitution. And it's interesting, you look at the justices who sided with us. I mean, Chief Justice John Roberts is the guy who, in a highly controversial opinion, effectively saved Obamacare, saved the constitutionality of Obamacare, which I obviously thought was a terrible opinion. But the left was loving on him after that. Now suddenly he rules against them in a case where I think he followed the law and followed the Constitution with a great degree of sincerity and just an honest, upfront approach to what the law actually was. And they're ready to, throw him out the window. It's the same with a lot of these cases over and over and over again, where anytime a decision goes against the outcome that they want, no matter what the law or the Constitution would dictate, the left cries foul and launches another attack on the Supreme Court. The left loves to talk about respecting institutions and the institutions and, respecting normalcy and all this other stuff. The second things turn against them, they're ready to throw out our entire constitutional system if it gets in the way of their goal of advancing the cause of leftism and persecuting their political opponents.
Yeah. The Democrats are also pretending like the conservative justices on the Supreme Court bench colluded with Donald Trump to give him king-like authority and immunity. But wasn't this ruling from the Supreme Court in regards to all presidents past that are living and future, and not just Donald Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. The chance of Barack Obama being indicted for drone striking American citizens now goes out the window. The chance of prosecuting Joe Biden for some of his official conduct after he leaves office, the crisis at the border, the Afghanistan withdrawal. The Supreme Court's opinion is pretty clear. Those are official acts, and he likely can't be prosecuted for those. Again, this wasn't a case about Trump. This was a case about the institution of the presidency and the control that courts have, or the ability of courts to insert themselves into the presidential decision-making cycle. So I think just, beyond my role as President Trump's attorney, just as an American who cares about our constitutional system, who cares about the office of the presidency, this was a hugely important opinion, and one that I think in the long term will prevent an endless cycle of political prosecutions and recriminations, basically starting the day any president leaves office. So if I were the left, I understand that they're ticked off that, President Trump wiggled out of another dilemma here. But really, this case is about far more than President Trump. It's about our system of government. And I would hope that at least some of them could see that This case was just, its outcome was dictated by our constitutional system and what the law is and always has been, going back to the founding of the republic.
Yeah. Wasn't going back to the January 6th case where they misapplied the law from like an Enron lawsuit, I believe it was. In that case, didn't Justice Amy Cohen Barrett, didn't she side with the liberal judges and Ketanji Brown sided with the conservative judges?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the Fisher case that I mentioned a short while ago. Yeah, Justice Barrett was on the other side of that, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, a Biden appointee, was on the side of the most of the conservatives there. And again, I think, these justices, they're weird people. They're a little bit isolated. Most of them are sort of law nerds. And I really think that this idea that there are Republican justices or Democrat justices, that's really not what's going on there. These are people who take the law seriously. And I think in most cases, they're just looking to see what, or in all cases, they're just looking to see what the law dictates based on the facts and the argument presented to them. But that Fisher case was a huge win. There have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these January 6 cases. And granted, there were some cases on January 6th where there was real violence against police officers, and those are in a different category. But you had legitimately peaceful protesters who may have walked inside the Capitol for a few minutes, who may have, been protesting aggressively, but didn't really do anything criminal or anything wrong, who have been charged under this, as you said, Enron era statute. This was Section 1512C2. It was part of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was major financial legislation, I think passed in 2004, 2005. And the intent of this particular statute was that if you shredded documents or made evidence unavailable to a congressional investigation, that the statute would allow you to be prosecuted. And they're basically saying that by protesting aggressively, the Department of Justice was saying that by protesting aggressively, these people interfered with Congress, and therefore they can be charged with this very serious felony offense. That's not what the statute was set up to do. The Supreme Court rightly rejected that interpretation of the statute. And as a result, a lot of these January 6ers hopefully will be resentenced. Their sentences will be recalculated, and hopefully many of them will get the justice they deserve, which is a release from incarceration.
Yeah, I know that there is a difference between the violent offenders and the nonviolent. For example, there was a doctor, Dr. Simone Gold. She was there talking about medical information and the tyranny of the government. And then she sees, the crowd, and she's walked into the Capitol. She's there for a couple of minutes, and then next thing, she's in jail for months for interrupting, official government business. And like, she literally wasn't even there for the Trump rally.
Yeah.
And now she gets pulled into this Enron era situation. Someone like that, they've already served their time, but at least it might clarify their, their police record or something like that.
Well, they won't have a felony on their record. And obviously, being a convicted felon is a very serious thing. It can impact your ability to get certain jobs. It impacts your other constitutional rights. In some states, your right to vote. Everywhere, your right to bear arms. I mean, being a felon is a very serious thing. And fortunately, I think a lot of these January 6ers will get relief from that Fisher opinion. I know a guy from Vernon County, Missouri. I won't use his name because I haven't asked his family for permission, but he was a totally peaceful protester. He walked into the Capitol. He hung around inside there for 17 minutes, didn't break anything. The only thing he said, it was all on camera. The only thing he said was, "We're conservatives. We don't riot. We don't break things." A police officer approached him, asked him to leave after 17 minutes. He then walked out of the Capitol and went home. I don't think he did anything wrong there. I certainly don't think he did anything criminal. He was sentenced to a year in prison. I mean, it's just an absolute insane weaponization of our system of law enforcement to persecute political dissent. And that's just so deeply un-American. I don't know why more folks aren't up in arms about what's happened to a lot of these people who got caught up in the events of January 6th.
Yeah. How, you've been on the other side of the justices with the Supreme Court, but how complex is a ruling from the Supreme Court? You've got to get 9 people on board. They listen to everything. They then have to go and write their individual opinions and citations and everything. The reason I ask is, Democrats in the mainstream media, they would have you believe that they're dragging their feet on Trump's behalf. But then when they rule the opposite ruling that they were hoping for, suddenly they rushed their decision in order to help Trump. How complex are those rulings?
Yeah, we always expected this presidential immunity decision to be certainly one of the last, if not the last of the term, for the simple reason that it was the last case argued of the term. We argued it on the very last day that the Supreme Court held oral arguments in April. In many respects, the Supreme Court moved far quicker with it than it would with most other cases. So the idea that there was some kind of rush from the court to help out Trump, it just doesn't make any sense at all. I think what we actually saw was the Supreme Court, all the justices really, grappling with these core issues of what the Constitution does and doesn't say or provide. I mean, these are complex issues. The power and scope of presidential authority is something that's been litigated since the dawn of the Republic. You think about seminal Supreme Court cases like Marbury v. Madison, which we cited extensively in our briefs, into the 20th century with the Youngstown Steel cases in the Harry Truman era. I mean, these are issues that the court has periodically grappled with throughout American history when you have issues of the interplay between the different branches of the federal government. I mean, this is sort of a normal task for the court, is trying to assess what the Constitution provides for in these complex cases that it sees. So I, for one, I'm happy that the court took this case, obviously. I'm happy they ruled in our favor. But more than that, I'm happy that they were able to tune out all of the politics and put all of that to the side and just focus intensely on what the law actually is, what it should be, and what the Constitution requires. And I think because they were able to do that, that's why we got such a strong, vigorous opinion from them that I think will protect the office of the presidency and, frankly, the American Republic for decades to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw this or not. This is breaking just this morning, but CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, says President Joe Biden owes the American people an in-depth and detailed cognitive test in order to display that he is mentally competent in order to serve as the president of the United States. As you watched the debates as a citizen of this country, was there any concern? And do you think that CNN's chief medical advisor has a point?
Yeah, I'm terrified. I'll be just brutally honest. What we saw in that debate stage was a man, Joe Biden, who is not capable of stringing two sentences together, much less exercising the weighty responsibilities of the office of the presidency. And then a day or two later, some of his staffers came out and said, well, Joe Biden is perfectly sharp between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. It's only before and after that he has some trouble. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm Xi Jinping, if I'm Vladimir Putin, if I'm any of these foreign leaders, what message does that send? That the White House itself doesn't have confidence in the president's abilities to make difficult decisions outside of core business hours. I mean, that's the opposite of what we need in the presidency, what we need in the White House. I think just in general, you look at Joe Biden and you compare him to Donald Trump. I mean, I've spent hours with President Trump discussing complex legal issues. I mean, he's an older guy, but he's sharp as a tack. And his energy, I mean, you see him on stage just discoursing for hours in front of these massive crowds. I mean, President Trump is clearly up to the job of being president, and Joe Biden is clearly not up to the job of being president. And however bad he is now, I mean, imagine how bad Biden's going to be 4 years from now, which is what the Democrat Party is asking us to sign off on. That's what they have queued up at the ballot box in November, 4 more years of Joe Biden. So I think Joe Biden owes us answers. I think the White House owes us answers. How long have they known that he's not up to the job? And I think the Democrat Party owes America an answer. What made them decide to foist this guy on us? They must have known the issues here. I think core party insiders must have seen him in private settings where he exhibited these incredible lapses in memory and concentration. I mean, what were they thinking? How can we ever trust them again with the leadership of this country when they were able to jeopardize American security and the American Republic all in the interest of political gain. It's absolutely despicable.
Yeah. You prompted a thought that I have. You said that you've personally sat for hours with President Trump going through complex legal issues. You guys are dealing probably with some of the most complex that we've seen in modern history. You now, juxtapose that with the Biden deposition tapes for when he stole classified documents as a senator and a vice president. And you have Merrick Garland, the head of the Department of Justice, and you have the White House and Biden himself saying, at all costs, do not release these. We do not want them to hear what is on there. Do you think that we will ever get those tapes? Do you think that we would actually see something similar or worse than what we saw on the debate stage from Joe Biden?
I'm sure that's the case. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting up the fight that they are to prevent their release. Merrick Garland is risking being held in contempt by the United States House of Representatives, potentially being jailed for contempt by the United States House of Representatives to prevent the release of those tapes. None of that would be happening if the tapes weren't absolutely damning. And, to speak more to what I just mentioned before, I mean, President Trump right now is dealing with obviously 4 criminal cases, numerous civil cases. Without getting into anything attorney-client privilege, in our conversations, I am constantly amazed by his knowledge of the law, by how intent he is on understanding every aspect and every minute detail of these cases. I've seen him take a similar approach to policy issues, to political issues. I mean, this is a guy who is at his absolute best. And Joe Biden is he's the worst he's ever been. I think that contrast is just jarring. But again, with respect to those tapes, there is no way they would be fighting this hard to prevent the release of those tapes unless those tapes would be absolutely career-ending for Joe Biden.
I agree. Why hide them? Why have so many layers blocking the ability to access those? Asking the head of the Department of Justice to put his career, his own reputation on the line in order to stand as a wall between us hearing those and not. It's very, very suspicious. But based on what we saw on the debate stage and Robert Hur, special counsel Robert Hur, saying, I didn't even feel comfortable bringing charges because he's so mentally deficient and poor memoried, couldn't remember, details about his own son, his life, his time in office. That right there should have been a red flag. And I believe if and when those tapes come out, we're going to see something worse. I mean, this guy had over a week to prepare for the debate that he flopped in. Now imagine he had 0 time to prepare for Robert Hur. I want to hear those tapes, but I agree with you. It's very, very suspicious.
So to me, the interesting thing about Biden is they can roll him out on stage during daytime and they can stick a teleprompter in front of him. And typically, if he reads the teleprompter, he can make it through an appearance. But they're not letting him answer open-ended questions from the press. They're not letting him engage in basically any unscripted appearances. And I think the debate shows why that's been the case for the vast majority of his presidency. That this is a guy who, as I said before, he can't string 2 sentences together. When he's prompted with an unexpected question, when he doesn't have a clear script or clear notes in front of him, he loses his train of thought. He's unable to provide an effective answer. There was a moment, during the debate where Biden he gave a half answer and then lost his train of thought and then just sort of trailed off. And it was one of the few moments where President Trump really attacked Biden at all. And he just said, I don't know what Joe just said. I don't even think he knows what he just said. And it was just a moment of absolute clarity. I mean, this is the president of the United States speaking to a national audience, answering a relatively simple policy question. And not only is his answer wrong, all of his answers are wrong, his answer was indecipherable. I mean, you literally didn't know what he was even trying to say. And to me, that's just very scary. I mean, until next January, this is the guy with his finger on the nuclear button. This is the guy behind the resolute desk in the White House making the tough decisions. And if he's unable to make those decisions, who is making them? I mean, do we have sort of a shadow government in effect here where senior aides to Biden are the ones actually calling the shots and he's just sort of rubber stamping decisions? I think that's more likely than not. And that's just not the way government is supposed to function.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, thank you so much for all that you're doing. I know there's a lot of conservatives that appreciate all of the time and effort that you're putting into defending President Trump. Thank you for coming on. I know we're up against the clock. You're a very, very busy man. Hopefully we can get you back on as we get closer to September and that sentencing. I'm sure a lot is going to change between now and then, but the Supreme Court ruling that you guys were able to go out and give precedence for and context to, I like you said, it's a game changer of a ruling. And to be a part of that, I'm sure is really, really neat. So I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, it's really great to be with you. It's truly been the honor of a lifetime to get to represent President Trump, especially before the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, I think we're fighting for more than just President Trump here. We're fighting for the future of America. And it's an honor to be a part of that fight. And it's great to join you again. I'm always happy to come back on. I always have a lot of fun chatting with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Have a great rest of your day.